Hi, everybody. Welcome to Resolve's Kitchen Table Conversation series. It's a new digital series hosted by Resolve, the National Infertility Association, which brings back the nostalgia of our founding around Barbara Eck's kitchen table. Miss Eck founded the first Resolve support group in 1974, where she brought women together to discuss issues that matter to them. We are proud to carry on this tradition through our nationwide network of support groups, through this web series, and just general conversations that we encounter every day with our community. Today's kitchen table conversation is fertility myths, facts versus fiction, and is sponsored by our friends at RMA Connecticut. The reason we wanted to bring this conversation together is because Resolve and everyone around this kitchen table spends a lot of time sharing education and facts around the topic of infertility and fertility. And I'm sure we've all heard the weirdest myths in our experience, and nothing surprises us anymore. I know that's the case for me. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our guests to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to wanting to raise awareness about infertility. And if you could think of it on the fly, the craziest myth you've heard about fertility or infertility. And Dr. Meyer, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Laura Meyer. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist. I'm a fertility doctor at RMA of Connecticut, and just really excited to be here today. You know, these kind of topics are things we do think about and talk about all the time with our patients, and just proud to be involved in this with Resolve today. And you know, Resolve does such great work for the community and providing people with connection and support. And so I'm just very happy to be a part of it. Oh, and the myth, I almost forgot. So I would say, I think maybe some of the craziest fertility myths I've heard are things maybe that are out there, sometimes even in the media. Like I can think of a few instances of people kind of at extremes of age, maybe, you know, somebody who's 60 years old plus having multiples, and it being out there that that was likely with her own eggs or things like that, that kind of float around and I think make their way to patients because they do get a lot of press. And then I think sometimes it puts ideas out there for people about what's more realistic or possible in terms of fertility and outcomes. And you know, some things that may not be so realistic. And so I would say those are some of the crazier things I've seen along those lines.
Again, that's making me take a note that maybe we should touch on some of the things that we see in the media. So we're going to get to that for sure. Jay, why don't you go next?
So my name is Jennifer J. Palumbo. Everyone calls me Jay because everyone that was born in the 70s was named Jennifer. So, you know, I had to do something to stand out. But I basically started as an infertility patient in 2009. And something that I thought, I don't know if you can call it a hardcore myth as much as it is a misconception, is that it would be easy to get pregnant, particularly because of my 5th grade health teacher. Who made it seem like if you're in a mile radius of sperm, you would just get pregnant. And they really did teach you how to avoid getting pregnant. So you thought, or at least I did, that it would be so easy. And the more I started on my own infertility journey and connecting with others in the community, it turns out everyone really, like the overwhelming majority, seemed to think they were going to get pregnant on the first try or in the first couple of months. And it really came as a shock when that didn't happen. And since then, I'm a freelance writer. I write a lot about infertility. I've worked a lot with Resolve, who I still am in awe of. There's like maybe 5 women who run Resolve, maybe more. I'm not good at math, but
a couple more, yeah.
but
less
the amount,
than 10, like, that's for sure. I'll tell you that.
It's like a minion of women and this huge organization. The mathematics behind what they pull off is mind-blowing to me. I can, you know, barely figure out what to make for dinner. And so I volunteered several times with Resolve for different events and advocated very heavily here in New York, where I'm from, to pass certain bills, the FAFTA bill, CPSA. And at one point I was working for a fertility marketing company, and that's when I really started to hear myths and misconceptions, because they would be thematic. They would, one person would call and ask, and I'm sure the doctors heard the same, you keep hearing the same things over and over again. And this, again, sounds, I feel silly saying this, but a lot of people didn't even realize that you had to try to get pregnant when you were ovulating. Like they didn't understand the timing of it. And I really was blown away just by how intelligent people across the United States didn't really maybe know the basics of conceiving. But in terms of the most outrageous, I got a question one time where they said, can the doctor just put one sperm in me because I don't want to have twins? I was like, there's a lot here to unpack. But that's not at all how that works. But I just think overall infertility is filled with misconceptions, myths, and just lack of understanding of basically what's available and what the complications can be.
Thanks, Jay. Jasmine, welcome.
Thanks for having me. So I'm Jasmine. I am part of a podcast called Infertilidad Latina, and we work with Resolve as of recently to translate a lot of your resources into Spanish, so they're accessible for Spanish-speaking patients or anyone needing fertility information, that kind of thing. And I started off as a patient, as did my other co-host. And we realized that there wasn't a lot of resources for us in Spanish, or there wasn't a lot of representation of the Spanish-speaking community, wherever you may be from. So that's how we got involved with Resolve, and our work revolves around advocacy, mental health support, and just sharing the different faces of fertility and infertility treatment. And one of the things we hear a lot, because we talk to women a lot, and I think a lot of women tend to believe that something is wrong with them, like men cannot be infertile. It's not them, it's, our own bodies as women, that is the culprit of the problem. And a lot of the myths around like what's wrong with women is shocking to me, because men suffer from infertility as well. And we always have to kind of remind women that it's not just women that deal with it, it's men too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. And I'm Rebecca Flick. I'm the Chief External Affairs Officer for Resolve. And as I mentioned before, when Jay was talking, I've been with Resolve for 16 years. We've answered a lot of questions. I've been asked a lot of questions over the years. I still, though, I guess the frustrating myth for me is that you have to go through all of this alone. And that's a big myth that I think we would all like to bust and solve for. So if the very basic underlying myth is you are not alone in this, there are millions and millions of people that go through this, and that there is a community of support waiting you. And also too, that I also get a little frustrating, this might just be because I'm in communications, but that no one talks about it, because I see a lot of discussions online, a lot of people talking about it. The other myth for me is how we're talking, like that no one talks about it because it's being talked about, but I think it's the conversations that we're having. So there could be different kind of conversations that this community could have to really bring our needs and our the barriers that we face to the forefront. So people are saying, oh, people do talk about this. So those are the ones I like to try to solve for on a daily basis, and what we work so hard for here at Resolve. So I think we all kind of touched it on, and I know Jay did, about her 5th grade teacher, but where do you think, how do you think myths around conception, fertility and infertility start? Does it have one starting point, or Dr. Meyer, I'll start with you. Do you have a common theme of where these misconceptions start from? And maybe we start there and start changing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it comes from a lot of different places. I think, and things sort of get passed along over time. I mean, I think to Jay's point, there is this emphasis on the not getting pregnant. I can't tell you how many patients come into my office and say that. Like, I can't believe I spent all these years trying so hard not to get pregnant, and now I find out I'm ready to go ahead and start my family and I'm having trouble. And, you know, I do think that comes as a big surprise to a lot of people. So I think it's important to have education just in terms of reproductive biology for people as they're growing up. So it's something that they know. I mean, I think it's so important for people to know about their bodies and how they work as in general. And I think that can help to improve health outcomes in many ways, but fertility included. And I think, you know, I think there are all these myths that some of it get perpetuated sort of word of mouth and people talk to each other. There are some things there's a lot of great information that's out there online and in the media. And then there's some stuff that, you know, makes its way around, as with any topic that's not as accurate. So people, you know, people kind of get their information all different places, but I think, you know, I think definitely educating people and empowering them with knowledge early on is kind of the best way to give them the tools they need to kind of figure out these issues as they come up, you know, as they get older or whenever they're ready to start their family.
Very true. Jasmine, you're shaking your head. Do you see any common themes in the Latina community?
Yeah. And I think a lot of our culture is very family oriented. And I know in general, everyone is family oriented, but in the Latin community, we kind of reinforce like women as mothers as like your ultimate job, like the ultimate blessing. You know, you want to grow your family as much as possible. And we have big families. And so I think Latin women kind of feel like that's a foregone conclusion. I'm going to get pregnant when I'm ready to. And when it doesn't happen, the pressure and the guilt and frankly, depression that sets in is really hard. And I think it's reinforced by people assuming that if you're not pregnant or you're having trouble getting pregnant, you are kind of an embarrassment. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on women dealing with infertility in our community.
Do you see that changing with younger generations? Like I have to, and I want to touch on it with Jay too, after you answered. I feel like I've seen conversations, I'm Generation X. I see younger women having much more empowered conversations about their fertility than I ever was given the opportunity to growing up in my, you know, late teens, early 20s. Is that changing in your community, Jasmine, about, you know, the pressure or the stigma around it maybe changing a little bit?
Yeah, and I can't speak for all communities because we do speak with a lot of women where those like very traditional mindsets are still causing those issues. And then I speak to a lot of young women like myself that are having these conversations and are educating generations before us on what infertility is, who can suffer from it, how you get treatment. And it can take a kind of religious turn in our community because it is seen as sort of like a intervention of God, if you will. So there's a lot of conversation on educating people like how to maneuver those conversations and to have your faith and your treatment and not be in conflict within your own families about, you know, your family building. So yes and no, it's still complex, but in terms of the conversations that we are having, they are more progressive. But, you know, we still have a lot of work to do.
And Jay, what about you seeing things online? Do you feel like younger generation of women we've got hope for them?
I hope so. I do think something that Jasmine touched on very nicely and is a good point all around, that especially in the context of this conversation. In 2018, there was a study published in the Journal of African American Studies, which they interviewed 6 Black couples about their experience with infertility and found that most of them viewed the condition as an anomaly among African American people. And when you're like, oh no, okay, we don't have infertility issues, and then you do, it can like contribute to feelings of isolation and shame, even though the reality suggests that African American couples are almost, I think, twice as likely, according to a Women's Health and Oprah magazine study that they did, to experience infertility as white women. However, the same study showed that 8% of Black women between the ages of 25 and 44 tend not to seek the same medical care that white women would. And I mention that because once Michelle Obama wrote her book and shared her story about pregnancy loss, there was like an uptick in the African American community actually going to reproductive endocrinologists, same for Gabrielle Union and others. And so I think it's a combination of everything that Dr. Meyer said and Jasmine said, that it's about education, but it's also about representation and people sharing, no, I am Latina, I am African American, or I'm Catholic, and I have infertility, because infertility knows no boundaries. And in terms of the younger generation, in 2013, I again worked for this company that did something shocking at the time, and they threw an egg freezing party, which was the first of its kind and really pissed off a lot of people. And I remember women would use fake names to attend. They didn't want to be photographed. They were embarrassed. And then in like 2019, I was at a different egg freezing event. Millennials are there Instagramming the event. They're talking about freezing their eggs. So I do think attitudes are changing. I hope the education's getting a little better, but I do think it's really the people that have the public platform that share their journeys that are like, no, really, you can experience this too, that almost make the greater impact.
So we can break down and break the myths and educate on facts through better representation and, you know, involving multiple types of people in the conversation. So
yeah, it's tough. And I don't know how you all feel. I would love to get your opinion, because I, you know, there are a lot of celebrities who we know have definitely, most likely, pursued donor eggs or maybe infertility treatment, and they're not transparent about it. And when I was a young, naive infertile, I was like, well, it's their business. But now that I'm an old, crusty infertile, I'm going to get more annoyed about it, because they could do such tremendous good in educating the younger generation to break these stigmas if they just were like, hey, this is what I did and it's okay. I don't know how you guys feel about celebrities breaking those myths, because I do think when they don't share it, it contributes to it.
Yeah, personally, you know, I was going through IVF, and my family had no idea. No one in our family had ever done it. And I was getting all types of questions that were very myth-based. And it wasn't until there was an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, one of them or both of them were doing IVF or freezing their eggs, that my sisters began to understand what I was going through and started to be sympathetic towards my experience. So it was like, that did help create a sympathy towards me, I guess, or an understanding that like, oh, what you're going through is really tough, because I saw one of the Kardashians go through it. So I do think that type of vulnerability and sharing your story creates a better or more empathetic experience for someone else. And to add that even if you're in an immediate community, you don't have that support, there is a huge online community that you can go to for support. I mean, that's where I get all of my support from. It's not necessarily people around me that understand.
yeah. Yeah, I think the whole celebrity thing could be its own conversation from where I stand a lot. You know, I think it's helpful. And then I think sometimes there's a false sense of hope that can come from someone with deep pockets. And that's the reality. I think a lot of times someone with, and so I look at it as, you know, my responsibility to connect with them and educate them on maybe a little bit more of the realities of it. But I do appreciate all of the celebrities that do come forward, because they are doing some good. And I think, but to Dr. Meyer's point before, when that's maybe that public figure or that media story is so the one-off, the true miracle, then I think it hurts a little bit more than it can help. But we did get a few myths submitted to us from our online community that I want to kind of touch upon. And I think this too, with the celebrity angle, might be a good one to start with. But you know, there's a misconception out there that infertility can't affect you until you're over 35. Dr. Meyer, you want to clear that up for us?
Yeah, so I do think, you know, part of this stems from the fact that there is a significant amount of infertility that can be age-related, and awareness about that has gotten better, which I think is a good thing, that it's sort of the word has gotten out a little bit about some of the fertility changes, excuse me, that happen with age. And while I think it's good to raise awareness about that, maybe part of the flip side of that is that when people are hearing that, there are some people who are kind of assuming, well, then if I'm younger, shouldn't be a problem. It also happens that oftentimes the younger patients, they may be in a scenario where it seems like all these people around them and their friends and their family, or, you know, or members that are in the same age range, are getting pregnant, you know, easily and without difficulty. And that's part of the reason that when it does happen at any age, but even particularly young age people, it can feel so isolating to people. Like, why is this happening to me? This isn't supposed to happen to me. But, you know, as we know, there are multiple factors that play into fertility and somebody's ability to get pregnant. And some of the other things that aren't, you know, that aren't age related can be things ranging from male factor infertility and sperm issues. You could have blocked fallopian tubes, someone could have PCOS. I mean, there's all sorts of different things that can also contribute. So I think that's a tough one. And it's definitely one that I see a lot. And I think, you know, people always feel taken or a little bit surprised when it happens. I think my patients who come in who are older, many of them come in a little bit more with the expectation that, okay, I knew if I'm a little older, I might need more help, but it can be tougher for some of the younger patients who really were taken by surprise when it didn't happen right away.
And they're usually in some kind of social situation, the younger patients, the under 35, where their like friend groups or social groups are probably all on this journey. You know, everyone, you know, they probably have a lot of peers who are trying to get pregnant who are maybe doing it a lot quicker. And so they definitely feel that isolation a little bit quicker, I would imagine, the younger that they are. I know that was my experience. I was 29. So definitely not 35 yet, and felt that I was on a, you know, in a group of women that were getting pregnant much faster and without help. Let's talk a little bit, Jay, you talked about it, that there's a myth that there's no way to protect your future fertility. And so you touched a little bit about egg freezing. What is your where kind of you sit on social media, like what do you think the conversations are now around egg freezing compared to when it first became a thing in the early 2000s?
Yeah, there was a lot of shame and stigma around it. And then I think it started to become, like, I think first when it was rolled out for elective reasons, you know, meaning not cancer related or medical related, I remember the early events that we had. There was like this equation of, oh, if I'm freezing my eggs, that means I don't think I'm ever going to get married. Or it was like this weird either or thing. Like you felt like a failure if you were freezing your eggs in the beginning because you hadn't met anyone yet. And I remember talking to women like, I'll freeze my eggs if I don't meet someone by my next birthday. it was like a different way of thinking about it. And I don't know exactly when or why it changed, but it seems like in the last couple of years, maybe it's with the companies adapting it, like Apple and Facebook, and some of the benefits being added to companies such as egg freezing, where people really do see it as more you're being proactive about your fertility health. And it became more of an empowerment thing than a failure thing. But for me, whether anyone freezes their eggs or not, I just wish that fertility was tested, AMH and FSH, earlier on, just like almost as regular as a pap smear, just to get some sort of indication of where your fertility health is at. Because what I did see is women going to just find out if they were eligible for egg freezing. A great deal of them, I think I remember about 20% of them, found out they had some sort of fertility issue, but they wouldn't have known it either unless they were trying to conceive or they had gotten this blood work because of egg freezing. So I just think overall, whether you freeze your eggs or preserve your fertility in some fashion, I think the big thing to do in terms of protecting your future fertility is just find out what the hell it is, and just get that information.
Dr. Meyer, how would a patient do that with their OBGYN? Kind of ask, is it normal to ask for like baselines? Like what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, I think one thing for patients to think about, or for women as they're thinking about contemplating pregnancy, number one is think about any baseline risk factors that they have. So certainly if there's any lifestyle things that need to change, if someone is a smoker, stopping that, if they have irregular cycles. So one thing is just like knowing, are there any risk factors at baseline that may contribute or be an issue? Have you had multiple pelvic or abdominal surgeries, and someone like that might be at risk for their fallopian tubes being scarred or things like that, to be aware of those kinds of potential pre-existing issues and talking to your OBGYN about them. And then in terms of like getting just general fertility testing, the most common testing that's done is an AMH level, anti-Mullerian hormone, or day 3 follicle stimulating hormone levels. These give a sense of egg quantity and of, for example, if someone was to do an egg freezing cycle, how they might respond to stimulating medication and whether they might get more eggs or fewer eggs. So it could be helpful in that sense. I think the tricky piece about it is, there's not a hard and fast fertility test per se. So I always tell people that, whatever their AMH may be, it doesn't necessarily tell somebody if they're going to be fertile or not. It's not a great predictor of spontaneous pregnancy, but it sometimes gives somebody a sense of kind of where they are in their reproductive life, or sometimes people may think about their timeline or being a little more proactive or freezing eggs or something if it's on the lower side. So I think sometimes having that information can be helpful as long as people get the proper counseling and understand, because I also don't want people to think, oh, my AMH is good, that means that's a guarantee I'm going to get pregnant. So it's always kind of like weighing these different factors and just making sure that somebody gets the counseling. But I totally agree. I think it's important to talk about it, talk to your OBGYN about it. There is testing that's out there. Know if you have any baseline risk factors that you can identify, and also for women, just having a sense of if they are ready to start trying, maybe what some of the timelines are, or when is a good time to come in, for evaluation or for help. We typically say for women who are under 35, if they've been trying for a year or more, that is what is classified as infertility, or 6 months or more if you're 35 and above. So just being cognizant and kind of proactive about those timelines so that if there are any issues, you find out sooner rather than later.
And I think too, I think we were trained as young women that you go and you see your OBGYN once a year, right? And so you could have that conversation in March, and like the March before you get married, if that's your plan is to get married and start a family, and then you have to wait, you in your head, you think you have to wait a whole year to have that conversation. So I would encourage people to pause and say, what, I can make another appointment. Right, we're so trained to see this one practitioner who has a tremendous impact on our reproductive health, like just answering questions for us, that I think there's opportunities to have other discussions with them, besides your annual checkup. So I know that's something I actually learned later in life to be a little bit more proactive with when it came to seeing my OBGYN. And then, doctor, can you just answer, since another myth we're going to bust here is that fertility is only a women's issue, when 1/3 of infertility is actually contributed to the male factor when there's a male partner involved. What are ways that men can proactively take charge of their reproductive health? Is there anything that they can do on their end?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. There are, that's a big misconception that comes up that fertility really is a woman's issue. I think part of it too is because women are maybe a little more used to thinking about their reproductive system and their reproductive health. Typically people are going to a gynecologist annually. For men, they may not be, you know, having any evaluations in that area, or they're not going to be seeing a urologist if they don't have any pre-existing issues. So sometimes they're just a little less attuned to thinking about that up front. Again, I would stress that if somebody has any risk factors, if someone had, you know, cancer treatment as a kid, or a history of undescended testicles when they were born, or, you know, things like that, or any other urologic issues, that they should probably get checked out sooner rather than later. The other thing is that a semen analysis is a test that's really easy to do. It's a non-invasive test. It's simple. The guy has to produce a sample. It's evaluated by an andrologist in the laboratory. So that's a good thing to check, you know, sooner rather than later. Occasionally I will see a woman who comes in and wants to get checked and is more hesitant maybe to ask her partner to get checked too. But to your point, a significant percentage of infertility has a male component. So I think it's just important to involve the man in the partnership, if there is one, very early on in the conversation, and to involve them in the workup as well, to identify if there's any issues. And then again, just general healthy lifestyle stuff, again, like the things like not smoking and stuff like that, just to optimize sperm health, is also helpful.
I want to ask our patients here, did the myth that IVF will guarantee a baby impact you and your journey in any way? And Jasmine, I know you have it muted. Can you go off mute? Or if not, I'll move to Jay. Okay.
Sorry, some text messages are coming in and dinging, so I apologize. Yeah, you know what? I'm LGBTQ, right? So I honestly believed that it was going to happen first time. I mean, we had no idea that infertility could even happen to us, and it did. And so I think we went in with the hope that it would happen the first time, and then it didn't, and then it didn't, and then it didn't. And a year later, I was diagnosed with unexplained infertility. So yeah, it was really hard to be immersed into the world of infertility and really just not expect it. The doctors, gosh, I apologize. The doctor had even said, like, get ready, you know, start buying stuff. And we were like, you know, really just assuming that it was a quick thing. We did not financially plan for it. We had no idea what to expect. We genuinely just thought it was going to happen.
So you're busting two myths there, that IVF always guarantees a baby, and that same-sex couples, it works for naturally as well. So first time. And,
you know, my wife ended up having fibroids and ended up having to get a hysterectomy, and we had no idea those issues were even happening. So it was just a lot of, you know, information at one point, and we literally had no clue that we had issues going on in both of our bodies. So
Jay, what about you?
I had done a talk recently about how to advocate for your health. And I shared a study that was done by JAMA a couple of years ago. This is why I'm no fun at parties, because I know these these numbers. But JAMA said it takes 6 to 9 IVF cycles to achieve a live, healthy birth. I should add, there are some studies that say different, like an average of 3.5, but JAMA's the one that I look at the most. But I think whatever your situation is, I think most patients don't realize universally there's an agreement that the odds of you getting pregnant on your first IVF are not as great as your second or your third or your fourth. But if you do go by JAMA, that's 6 to 9 cycles on average what's that? That's 12,500 is IVF times 6 to 9. I mean, who the hell has that? Especially when insurance only covers about 10K, if they even cover it at all. And so I always share it whenever I talk to people, because it actually helped me, because it took me several IVFs to have my family. And I remember when the first one didn't work, because I thought it was just going to work, I felt like such a failure. But when I found out that I was statistically accurate, that actually was comforting to me. So I do think people want to punch me when I share that with them. But what I'm trying to let them know is they should manage their expectations. But I have to do a call out too to pregnancy loss, because I think that's another whole area of misconceptions. Even if you didn't have trouble getting pregnant, there's still, and certainly Dr. Meyer could talk about this more. I talked to too many women who have had 2, 3, 4 miscarriages, and they're told, oh, that's just bad luck. Or one of my friends, her mother-in-law told her it's because you keep getting pregnant with girls. I don't know. Yeah, that was lovely. But I think part of infertility is also pregnancy loss. And there's a lot of misconceptions that even if you go through IVF and get pregnant, unless you did genetic testing like PGTA, you wouldn't experience a loss. So I think that's also kind of part of that. I mean, it's awful, but I do think that needs to be as much of the part of the conversation as anything, because pregnancy loss is what, 1 in 4.
Yeah, and I PGS tested my embryos, AA embryos. There was nothing physically wrong with me. I was pregnant on my 3rd transfer, and I lost my pregnancy. So even PGS tested, AA, everything coming perfect. It didn't, it wasn't,
Thank you for sharing that, because I really do think a lot of the marketing, not to be unkind, a lot of the marketing is like, oh, you do PGTA, you're fine. It's a higher implantation rate, lower risk for miscarriage, which I'm not saying it's not a great test, because it's helped people, but you still have to be aware that nothing is a guarantee, I think, when it comes to fertility.
Dr. Meyer, what do you, because Jay hit on a couple of points, I'd love to talk about that myth, the one and done, and why we don't talk about this IVF as more of a course of treatment. Like, I've never had any of my friends, and unfortunately I've had too many who faced cancer, I never hear them say, I'm going to go through chemo once and be fine. It's a course of treatment. Not that I don't want to associate IVF and chemotherapy, because they're very, very different, but why is it that infertility patients don't necessarily get the factual information, like, we need to approach this as a course of treatment, and we're going to start with one and see where that goes?
Yeah, I think, it's tough, because in some ways there's such a leap to IVF, just in terms of what it involves. Like, let's say somebody was doing inseminations before, IVF, there's a lot more to it. You're taking all the shots. It's a lot more monitoring. You're going under anesthesia. It is this sort of jump from some of the less invasive treatments. And I think it's really that in and of itself kind of takes some adjustment for people to get used to. And I think it's really hard for people to think about, oh, I'm going to go through all of this and not have success. And I do agree with you that I think it's really important that people do kind of know what to expect. And, the statistics are going to be somewhat different for different groups of people, but I do think it's important. I try to do that in my own practice too, particularly for patients who really may have a lower success rate, to be, realistic, optimistic too, but explain to people kind of what the likelihood is, so that they understand what to expect, so that they can plan for it, so that they know what they're getting into. Also, I would want, I want someone to understand then what they're undertaking and what the success rate is, and to feel comfortable with that before they go ahead with the treatment. So I think it's important, but it is, it's hard. And I know it can feel very demoralizing for patients. I think Jay brought up a great point too, about just this question of PGTA. And Jasmine, I think your example was a really good one, because I think that point does often get missed. I usually will quote to people about a 10% pregnancy loss, even with a PGTA tested embryo, which, to be fair, is much lower than getting pregnant any other way, but still 1 in 10 is not remote. And many of those are earlier biochemicals, but still that is such a devastating, difficult thing to go through. So it's hard, and it's important for people to know that there aren't guarantees going into it, and to kind of understand what the statistics are.
We have covered a lot of different myths, so I want to kind of end this conversation with some advice to those that tune in and watch. And so I'd love to hear from each of you, just some advice to the person starting out on this journey or looking for information. Like, what are things that have helped you along the way? Qualified information, specific resources. Let's give them a shout out to those that really help. And to Dr. Meyer, like, what do you wish every patient came in kind of understanding or knowing? Like, how can we help patients be better patients? I think that's a mission of Resolve, that we want the information out there, but we also want to empower patients to go in advocating for themselves and being the best patient they can for you. So Jay, I'm going to start with you. What are some tips that you want to give viewers on how to find the right information?
It's a really tough one because there's so much information online. And I have to say, sometimes the patient community actually really can be helpful, but you have to still, I guess, quantify that and sort of fact check what other patients are saying. But I think the biggest thing that I always try to tell, fellow infertility patients is you have options, that sometimes it's not if, it's just how. And it's so important that you know that you can take an active role in your fertility journey. You can't, guarantee the outcome you want. But I think some patients don't realize that there are so many options: genetic testing and donor eggs and donor sperm and IUI, assisted hatching and ICSI. And there's so many different things that you can look into and ask your doctor about. Do you think this is appropriate for me? Should we do single embryo transfer? Should I try Menopur if you're over 35? Like, the more you can educate yourself with sources like, I totally blanked. Like, what did I just say? JAMA, the CDC, Resolve has a very robust website that you can definitely rely on. But, American Society for Reproductive Medicine, these are the sites that you should go to get those options. And then it's funny, Lisa Rosenthal, I saw her speak on patient advocacy, and she said something that always stuck with me. She's like, be a bad patient. She meant, don't just sit there and listen to your doctor. Ask questions, ask about tests, and don't be afraid to try and explore your own options and advocate for yourself using those resources. That's, I always think, my biggest advice. And have a sense of humor if you can.
Very important. Jasmine?
Yeah, I think Jay pretty much said everything I would say. And I think just to add to that, just to make sure that you include your mental health in that care for yourself, because it is or can be an arduous journey for you and your partner. And just to kind of make sure that you include that as part of your treatment plan, because it definitely can take a toll. And I know that we don't really even think about that aspect of treatment. So I think I would include just mental health, check in, have awareness of yourself during the process, and lean on communities online if you don't have any directly in your own community in person.
That's a really good point. I will say one of the myths that was just busted for me in recent years was, I think I used to make the assumption and Resolve even, that people didn't stay in treatment, maybe past that first cycle after a failure because of cost. It actually is because of the emotional toll. And that is research that was done by my hero, Dr. Ali Domar. So that's a really important fact that I think we, need to bust the myth that people don't stay in treatment because of the out-of-pocket expenses. That's definitely an influencer. It's more the emotional toll. So let's make sure that we're getting factual information out about kind of saving your mental health through that process as well. Dr. Meyer, I'm going to wrap it up with you.
So I would agree with some of the websites that were mentioned, or some great resources for finding out information, and then would just also echo that it's so important to ask questions. It's certainly, in the world of fertility, not one size fits all medicine. There are so many different options and treatment routes. And obviously there's going to be a set of things that might be medically appropriate for a patient in a particular situation, but it also is taking into account things like the patient's goals and preferences and what they're comfortable with. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. So you just want to be really well informed as a patient, ask as many questions as you can. If you're ever confused about something, or don't feel like you have a good handle on what's going on, or you're unsure of next steps, or unhappy about something, it's always good to reach out and communicate with your team, or sit down with your doctor. There are many resources out there to support you along the journey, and you just want to make sure that you feel really comfortable and well informed as you go throughout the process. And I think, just to make the point that was touched upon before, which is that it is a journey, and it's just, there are many ways to get there, as people have said, but it is a journey, and to hang in there throughout the process.
Well, I want to thank our participants today for this thoughtful conversation. I really enjoyed it. We covered a lot. I want to give a shout out to all the believers who still eat the pineapple core and eat their McDonald's fries after a transfer. I can support those, myths, when it comes to just anything you do to make yourself feel comfortable during this process, feel empowered, and McDonald's fries. I mean, who wouldn't turn those down after a transfer? For those that are new to Resolve, we invite you to check out our website, resolve.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if this content was helpful for you, you can also support our mission with a donation through resolve.org. We count on contributions from people just like you in our community, which helps us provide free support programs and helps our advocacy work throughout the year. Thank you, RMA of Connecticut, for this generous sponsorship and being part of this conversation. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.